If you're looking for a game that features hordes of enemies, satisfying combat, and meaningful progression, all tied within a dark fantasy setting, few games deliver as well as Vermintide 2 did back in 2018 when it first launched on PC. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Vulkan, and with Fat Shark releasing Warhammer 40k Darktide in a few months, I wanted to step back into the brutal world that they created to see if it still holds up 4 years later. So let's find out if Vermintide 2 is worth playing in 2022. When it comes to Warhammer games, they typically have a hard time getting things right. You have Warhammer 40k Inquisitor Martyr and Chaos Bane. Both were isometric ARPGs that really didn't do so well when they first released. But then you do have some successes like Dawn of War, Space Marine. I mean, even Necromunda Hired Gun had some praise at launch. But unfortunately for Warhammer, these are pretty few and far between. Warhammer Vermintide 2 is one of those successes. This is a game that truly understands what it is, what it's trying to accomplish, and really doesn't stray too far from that. And with a very positive rating on Steam, with over 65,000 reviews, the players seem to think so too. So the question is, what makes Vermintide 2 so good? Well, for me, it's quite a few different things. So the main selling point when I first logged into Vermintide 2 is the combat and how incredibly well done it is. The weight of a great sword hitting an enemy, the thump of a crossbow, the sizzle of a spell being cast. All of these elements tie so well together in terms of visuals, sound, and feedback, and they all fit the Warhammer fantasy that creates a new standard of combat for me, especially when it comes to games that are primarily carnage focused. So I had so much fun literally just slaying enemies in Vermintide 2, and that kept me engaged and kind of piqued my interest to actually learn the rest of the game and understand the ins and outs of what Vermintide 2 brought to the table. Now, this is the exact same reason why so many people stuck with Destiny 1 when it first launched. Bungie just has a way of making gunplay feel insanely good. They understand what it takes to make gunplay work. And that kept players around while they fixed literally the rest of the game. People were farming patrols. People were doing very rudimentary and mundane things while they waited for Bungie to figure out what they truly wanted to do. And in the case of Vermintide 2, all of the combat is done playing through campaign missions or maps in the Chaos Wastes. Now, these missions start off fairly slow, you have a group or two of enemies, but once you're a few minutes in, things start to get really wild really quick. The music picks up, suddenly hordes of enemies are just pouring over walls and cliffs, and you're battling your way to objectives or defending points on the map, all while trying to basically keep yourself and your team alive and helping out other team members who get pinned down by an elite. It's such a very cool experience, and I know that this is the same formula that Left 4 Dead uses. But there's just something that works so well in a Warhammer fantasy setting for this particular formula. Everything just seems to kind of come together, and Fat Shark did a great job of capitalizing on this. Now, peppered within the legions of foul beasts are elites and mini bosses. Now, these were incredibly fun to play against and overcome, right? Elites are your special enemies that have things like Gatling guns, they place banners, they stun your other heroes, even yourself, until you go and save them. Now, mini bosses, on the other hand, they're a whole other level of enemy. They come with their own health bar, affixes, they command the attention of your entire party to bring down because they're so powerful. And when I played Vermintide 2 at launch, I remember seeing like rat ogres and things like that, but I believe since then they've added quite a few more. Things like Chaos Spawn, different commanders, minotaurs, really just a lot of different things that you can go through and interact with and try to fight. And these guys are very powerful. I remember I jumped back in for this review and a Chaos Spawn showed up and just completely nuked my party. Granted, I was playing with bots, but still, it was a tough encounter and something that was really fun because it truly felt random. So you always had to be on your toes and make sure you had your guard up and your awareness up. That way you didn't get caught unaware. Now, each one of these has its own set of skills, strengths, and weaknesses, so make sure to exploit those if you need to. So overall, like I said, I really looked forward to these because they added a huge wrinkle to the gameplay loop. And lastly, I did want to mention co-op. So if you can play this game with friends, please do, because it is an absolute blast. I mean, most of my memories with this game are from fun adventures with my buddies. But if you are playing solo, it's still a really fun time. Don't overlook it if you're somebody who doesn't have folks that are going to be playing Vermintide 2. You get your own bots in your party to help out. You don't feel like you're completely on your own, and you're still able to play through all of the missions and just have a good time. Plus, there's matchmaking, so if you really want to play with other people, you can party up, and matchmaking seemed to go incredibly fast. I didn't have to wait long at all to get into a party. I just clicked, it went, and I was in, and I was playing, and it was a fun time. So now that we've covered combat and maps, I want to shift our focus to the heroes that we'll be playing as. So in Vermintide 2, you get to play as one of 5 heroes, each one with different weapons and skills to use, and as you play each one and level them up, you're going to unlock new careers for them to choose from, which is a fancy way of saying archetypes or subclass. Now, these new archetypes can completely change the way a hero performs. So let's take like Carillion, for example. So you have her base career, which is more of a classic ranger that uses a bow, but then you also have a new support class that wields a staff and can cause poison damage with thorns. Each one has different weapons, skills, and play styles, but it's still the same base hero. Now, this keeps things fun and interesting because you can unlock these as you level up, and it gives something to shoot for. Now, obviously, the downside here is that some of these classes are paid DLC to unlock. Like the example I gave above with Carillion, the staff and poison damage career is actually part of the Sister of the Thorn DLC. Now, these aren't overly expensive, they're $4 each, but it's still something to keep in mind given the fact that the base game is $30 right now. Now, to build on those differences, each hero also has talents they can unlock after you reach certain milestones. Now, these are fairly gameplay impacting and can be freely changed depending on your mood or your build. So now that we've talked about heroes, let's talk a little bit about loot. Because if you're like me, you're a big loot-oriented person. If a game has loot, it's immediately on my list and I want to play it and I want to see what it truly brings to the table. So gearing up in Vermintide 2 is about as standard and a fair as you can get in an RPG. Each hero can equip 2 weapons and 3 accessories. These come in different rarities, ranging from common to exotic, and they share an inventory across all of your heroes. So if you have something placed on one hero, you can take it from them to equip it to another. But like I mentioned, heroes will specialize in different weapons, so some careers you may not be able to wield certain weapons, and therefore you need to either find or craft a new one to use. Now, speaking of crafting, this is another straightforward system. You can break down any gear that you no longer need into base materials. Then you can take those materials and craft new items. Now, crafting is completely RNG in terms of rarity, affixes, and effectiveness. So while you can choose the actual type of weapon you want, you are at the mercy of the RNG gods as to whether it'll be an upgrade or not. But honestly, that's not the only thing you can do with crafting. You can also reroll affixes, improve rarity, modify a variety of things on each item as long as you have the materials. This lets you keep an item that you really like and continue improving it to get the role and the playstyle that you need. Outside of crafting any items you need, the main source of loot is from chests at the end of missions. Now, these start off as basic wooden chests, but as you collect key items throughout missions, you perform certain feats, and depending on how well your party did, the chest will accumulate points and then level up, resulting in better gear. This helps give incentive to explore and collect key items during your missions, rather than just sprint through the map each and every time. So, those are all of the things that Warhammer Vermintide 2 does right, but what about the things that the game does wrong? What should we look out for Darktide when it comes out? Well, there are a few glaring issues with Vermintide 2 if you're someone who's never played it. One, the Warhammer fantasy setting might not be for everybody. If you don't like Warhammer, you may struggle to actually get into the game since its aesthetic is literally dripping in Warhammer. It is very much the poster child for Warhammer fantasy. Number 2, you're going to play the same maps and layouts over and over and over again. So if you really have a hard time with handcrafted levels or repetition, this game might not be for you. Now, the timings of hordes, the objectives, and the key items are all randomized, so there is a little bit of variance there. But in terms of actual landscape and flow, these will not change. So looking forward to Darktide, this might be something that we'll have to go through again, or maybe they added a little bit of randomness into the levels, which would be very much welcomed. Number 3, Melee. Melee, Melee. This game is nearly exclusively melee, and if you're someone who isn't a fan of swinging a weapon, then I'd say wait for Darktide, because this game is nearly all melee all the time, whereas Darktide looks to include a lot more ranged options and a lot more firearm options, things like the las gun, for instance. So now that we've recapped Vermintide 2, what does all of this mean for Darktide? Well, honestly, it means a lot. We know that Fat Shark is a competent developer who knows how to make a good horde-based game with nice supporting systems, and it seems to have a decent track record. Vermintide 1 was good, Vermintide 2 was great, so hopefully Darktide continues that trend and becomes legendary. And because of that track record, we can also make some assumptions that the base gameplay loop will probably be roughly the same thing with like missions, the key items, the loot, heroes, the career paths, and lots of enemies. But truly, we will have to wait until September to tell. So to answer our main question, is Vermintide 2 worth playing in 2022? The answer for me is a definite yes. The game does so much right, it's fun, it includes bots, so if you're somebody who's solo, you can play, has matchmaking. And yes, the missions are repetitious. They can be boring after you've played through them 100 times, but the combat helps you kind of, grit your teeth and bear through that because it's just such a fun game to play. And with the game going on sale frequently, you might even be able to get it for under $10 as it is right now. It's on sale for like $8. And I should mention that this game is also available on Game Pass for Xbox. So now I'm going to turn the mic to you guys. Is Vermintide 2 a game that you've played? And if so, what do you think? Do you think it's worth playing in 2022 or worth playing at all? I want to hear from you guys, so please leave a comment in the comment section below. Now, thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more looter shooters and action RPGs. And if you want to support the channel beyond a regular subscription, please check out the join button below. As always, this has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you next time.